before we get
like,
started? Sure.
I'm
Okay.
just so grateful for so many reasons that you wrote this particular book. It means a lot to me because my mom and I used to talk about what happened in Tulsa when I was like younger, when I was in my teens and early 20s. And that now has been, it's been 17 years since she transitioned. And during the time we were talking about it and talking with family and friends and all the things, and in the beauty shop, she had a beauty shop, and we always only listened to stuff that was about our liberation. Um, it was still considered a conspiracy as if it had not happened. Like this did not happen. Just like so many of the places where we were burned out, flooded out, just bombed out, all the things. And so I think the timing of this particular book when Tanisha was like, "This is what we're going to be reading," I was like, "Oh my God!" And I have a good friend that's actually working on a movie. He had gotten connected with Viola Fletcher before she passed away, and gotten the rights to her story, being in Tulsa during this time, being a young girl. And so I was just like, oh my God, the story is like, we're like, it's so validated. And so reading your story, also just thinking and reminiscing about my mother and how her spirit is moving through, and quite frankly, all the ancestors, for my opinion, are like, justice, on all the planes, and we're seeing it all over. I'm so grateful to be in this space with you. And I just want to say thank you,
Thank you.
just thank you.
Thank you. I think it's so important, as I said, to think about the historical context in the moment that we're in without going into that too much. But it will come up because as I talk to you all about the story of how I got into this particular space, it is actually something that I was brought into beside my historical connection through a current event that happened in 2021. As you know, the book is the middle part of it is a reissuing of the book that my great grandmother wrote, her own eyewitness account of surviving the massacre, along with her little 7-year-old daughter, my paternal grandmother. And I wrote the afterword, and the foreword and introduction include the words of Dr. John Hope Franklin, who, of course, was also a massacre descendant. His father, Buck Franklin, survived the massacre and was instrumental as an attorney in bringing lawsuits against, the first, against the insurance companies, against the local jurisdictions, and these kinds of things, which, of course, they paid money to, I think, one white person. But other than that, for us, it is a reminder that the system is not created to support and uphold our interests, our very lives. And so we have to be responsible for those things. Sometimes we are lulled into a false sense of security, and we get as this book says, the nation must awake. We get our wake-up call. And we know at that time that we must galvanize and act on our own behalf, regardless of what other people are or are not doing. So with that said, in terms of the ideology of this particular volume, which was issued in May of 2021 at the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre, coincidentally, I was sitting at home. It was a Wednesday. It was Wednesday, January 6th, 2021. And at the time, I was still working on a job that I had, that I retired from in October of this past year. And as I was sitting there on my couch, because I was involved in something, I was also looking at Twitter. And as I was watching, I began to see these images unfold of people crawling across the walls at the nation's capital. And I thought, just like, the incredulity of people who don't want to believe that Tulsa happened, I almost couldn't believe that this was happening, unfolding before my very eyes. I'm thinking, what in the world is going on? I, living in Washington, D.C., live about 5 miles from the Capitol. And I'm thinking, this can't be happening. But as I saw, um, what it was, who was involved, what it meant, and who had inspired this real insurrection, by these, I call them Confederates and secessionists, seditionists, segregationists, neo Nazis. I mean, an amalgam of all kinds of miscreants. Uh, as I saw this unfolding, my mind flew immediately to the Tulsa Race Massacre because it said to me, when white folks don't get their way, there will be violence.
Okay. All right. That's true, girl.
There's no
Okay.
two ways about it. It's not a
Mhm.
matter of if, but when.
Yes,
In this
yes.
case, these people had been simmering since the election and they were mad.
Okay. Wait a
And when
minute.
white people are mad or uncomfortable,
Mhm.
baby, people better watch out
I know that's right. I
because
know that's right.
violence is coming.
Yeah.
I simply didn't know, it would be I thought it would be more dispersed. It was directed directly at the seat of power, at the seat
Mhm.
of where this government gets its authority. And
Yeah.
that tells you how dangerous and absolutely fundamental this was.
Yeah.
When I saw it unfolding and I was reminded of Tulsa, I I contacted an editor that I had written for before, and I said, I must do this story. It was a story that I wanted to do and have published in the Washington Post, which, of course, as we know, is a compromised media outlet at this point. But in any event, that's where I had an editorial contact. And I told her about my story idea, pitched the story idea, and she said, okay, let's go with it. So I wrote this story. I don't know if you've seen it. Probably you haven't. I don't know if you've done any, um, you know, Googling of my stuff before this meeting. But in any event, someone saw this story a couple of days after it was published by the name of Scott Ellsworth, a Tulsa native, public historian. He's at the University of Michigan, I believe, in the African American history department. He's a white guy. And he is the person who, along with Dr. John Hope Franklin, was instrumental in putting together this introduction. He reached out to me and he said, I've been looking for you for decades. And I said, what? He said, I've been looking for a living descendant of Mary Jones Parrish, and I consider you and your family Tulsa royalty. I was blown away. So, through that connection with Scott Ellsworth, I did find out that Trinity University Press, because this book is already in the public domain, it's over 100 years old, it was going to be republished. And I reached out to them to identify myself, and we ended up collaborating on the volume. And that's how my particular portion ended up in the book.
Okay.
What I'll say to you from Scott Ellsworth's writing about this book, at the end of his introduction, he says, immediately following the riot, Parrish was hired by the Interracial Commission to do some reporting on what had happened. Throwing herself into her work with her characteristic verve, Parrish interviewed several eyewitnesses and transcribed the testimonials of survivors. She also wrote an account of her own harrowing experiences during the riot, and together with photographs of the devastation and a partial roster of property losses in the African American community, published all of the above in the book Events of the Tulsa Disaster, the original title. While only a handful of copies appear to have been printed, Parrish's volume was not only the first book published about the riot and a pioneering work of journalism by an African American woman, it remains to this day an invaluable contemporary account. My purpose as her direct descendant, is to restore her name in history as one of the principal architects of the transmission of this story for posterity, which had been lost, suppressed for many years. But in this case, her name has been resurrected, and it is my purpose to make sure that it is known deeply and broadly for the role, the pivotal role that she has played.
All right, all right. So I guess I'm probably just gonna have to put this and put this out to the people. uh I was just like trying to get us started, but I guess I'm gonna have to add this because this is a lot of information that you just gave to us.
I was
But I
thinking
want
the
people to know that
same
the name of the book.
thing.
I know, like we hadn't even started, and I mean we gone already. I think I'm gonna have to add this part into the recording. I can't delete this. But I want the people to know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want the people to know that the name of the book and the discussion that we're having today is called The Nation Must Awake, My Witness to the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, originally published by Mary E. Jones Parrish. The Nation Must Awake. The Nation Must Awake. And we have with us the great granddaughter of Mary E. Parrish today, Annalise Bruner. And just want to say welcome and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and join us on this discussion today. Did you still want to give us a little more introduction about just what is it that you do so that people can know? And
Sure.
go ahead.
Sure. As I said, I recently retired from the workaday world, but I'm still very much involved in this project. I call it my project, my passion, the thing that I do that gives me purpose and a sense of, wanting to get some things done. I am a writer and editor. I live in Washington, D.C., and I've been here for over 40 years, and have spent most of my career here, working in the private, uh, uh, public, and non-governmental, and media sectors, as a writer, as an editor. And when I say a writer, internal, because I mean, a lot of people think about, oh, what have you published for books? Some articles that I do, that are just mine, but, corporate writing, corporate editing, within, a controlled, setting. So that's what I do. I am originally from San Francisco and grew up also in East Oakland, home of the Black Panther Party. And much of my worldview about the role of African Americans in this country was formulated as a child who grew up, in the shadows of the Black Panthers and their ethos of self-sufficiency, taking care of our own and defending our communities, much like the people did in Tulsa. They were eventually overrun because, everyone knows, we're only 13% of the population. Firepower is not the way that we're going to be able to confront the things that we do. But when we are under physical threat, we do have to think about our own self-defense. So that's my particular background. Again, I retired from what they call productive work last year, and I'm working on several projects, but most are focused on, again, promoting the legacy of Mary Jones Parrish, working on making sure that not only is she remembered for what she did, but for the historical significance of what that particular place and time and the parallels and echoes and through lines that we witness today within our society as we face these regressive and harmful policies that our communities are under.
Okay. So again, we will be discussing the destruction of Tulsa's Greenwood District, the race massacre that occurred again in 1921. And actually, the dates of the events was May 31st and to June 1st, over a 24-hour period. The whole district was literally wiped out. So I want to begin with speaking about how this all came about. So in the story, it stated that Florence, which is your grandmother, correct? She was looking out the window, told her mother, "Hey, I see some cars out here. You know, I see some people out here." And her mother was like, "Oh, what's going on?" So all of a sudden, these, the lights went out. I mean, it was a whole catastrophic thing that just happened. I mean, the lights went out, the whistle was blown, and all of a sudden, gunshots. But before that, before we get into that, I want to tell the people about how this even occurred. Okay, so let's just back a little bit. So there was a colored boy by the name of Dick Rowland. Okay. And he accidentally stepped on a white girl's foot by the name, her name was Sarah Page, and they were on an elevator. So Dick Rowland worked at I believe, a shoe parlor, and he wasn't able to use the restroom where he worked. Okay, mind you, this is 1921. He was not able to use the bathroom where he worked. So he had to go to the Drexel building on the fourth floor where all coloreds can use the restroom. So Sarah Page was the operator, the elevator operator. At the time, I believe they were both teenagers, and something happened. We don't know exactly what, but something happened where he kind of stepped on her foot and she screamed. Okay, she screamed. He ran out the elevator. All of a sudden, the city officials, they went to the jail. They started talking about they're going to do some lynchings, and then the paper came out within a couple of hours that afternoon. And I mean, a lot of the black guys over there, they got their rifles, their guns, and said, "Hey, we heard about this lynching. We're going to go down there and protect this brother." And city officials let them know, "Hey, he won't be lynched." At this point in time, there were about 50 white men out there, and then all of a sudden, within minutes, it just started to accumulate 50 to 100 to 150, 200, and it just went just rapid to literally, before you know it, it was 500 white men, then 1,000 men. And the black guys went back, and then they came back again. And then all of a sudden, one of the officials came to the guy and said, "What you doing with your rifle?" And he was like, "What is it to you?" And all of a sudden, shots were fired. Okay, like I stated, there was a report there was a newspaper that printed out stating there was going to be a lynching for a black guy, which was Dick Rowland. And because it was like a sexual assault, the media had a kind of switch things up. It wasn't even like, if it wouldn't even probably hit the newspaper, who knows what would have happened. But once it hit that, the newspaper, the black men marched to the jail, 500, like I stated. They accumulated all these white men, and they were ready just ready to go in, basically go in. And shots were fired. And as the city official stated, all hell broke loose. And within the 24-hour period, the Tulsa Massacre riot began, and the Greenwood District was literally destroyed. Okay, so I want you to talk about, Annalise, I want you to mention, give us some pointers of how you stated in your forward that you didn't learn about the Tulsa Massacre until you were an adult. Why did your family keep this historical event such a secret? So I want you to give us the backstory on that. How you even got the book in your hands?
Yeah, one quick thing. As far as the newspaper was concerned, the Tulsa Tribune, and the news of the lynching, it wasn't really a report. It was instigation. And so that's really an important aspect that we have to keep in mind, that this fellow, I think the publisher's name was Jenkins Lloyd Jones, and he was a relative of Frank Lloyd Wright, the famous architect, and he was a raging racist. And so when this, I think there's some backstory about some experience he had with some Black people he knew, but I mean, how many reasons do these people, how much justification do these people really need? Not very much. So just I appreciate your telling, but I just wanted to emphasize that point, that this was really instigated by the newspaper, and Negro lynching, or it was just, that was bait for sharks, for them to for him to publish that story like that. As far as my learning about it when I was older, you know, there are several ways that I think people deal with horrible trauma. Sometimes they talk about it and can't stop talking about it. Sometimes they can't talk about it at all. And I I have always had the impression that my father was waiting for me to turn 35. He has 4 children, and he wanted to see which one he was going to give this responsibility to. And I think by the time I was 35, he realized that out of his 4 children, I was the one who was most likely to take very seriously our history, not only as a people, but as our family. And that I would, as he put it, do something with this. This is what he told me. He called me Lisa. He said, Lisa, I want you to see if you can do something with this. And with that, he went over, got this his papers, and pulled this book out. And that was the first time that I had known anything about the story, known anything about my great grandmother, even her name. He had never mentioned. Now, I knew my grandmother because she lived in San Francisco also. I knew her, but my parents were divorced. And so I didn't really spend a lot of time when I was coming up with my dad, just like visit, but not like in the household together where you're talking constantly and sharing information, news, family history, those kinds of things. And so I lost the opportunity uh, to have the kind of griot experience that a lot of people have when they live in the home with their parents or grandparents or whatever. And my great grandmother, Mary Parrish, was still in Oklahoma. And I had never visited Oklahoma before 2021. So, in my estimation, I think that my father, the reverence with which he brought this family heirloom out that he had been given, let me know that he thought it was something extremely important, significant, but also something rather mysterious and secretive. That was kind of like the sense that I got from him. And that, it was almost as if he was telling me something and looking over his shoulder. Those Black people were intimidated. And, a lot of times we forget how perilous their day-to-day lives were. For Mary Parrish to go around in the aftermath, when these white folks wanted to keep that hush hush, to go around and be asking questions. You know, you'll notice in some of the accounts, some of the interviews that she did, some people wanted to remain anonymous. They were still afraid that those people might do this again. So it was, we putting ourselves into that historical context and thinking about, what could have been going on in their minds. They were still afraid. And I don't know how long that lasted, but even if it didn't last, for example, my father grew up in Tulsa. It was something that you just didn't talk about. Always looking over your shoulder when you're thinking about white people. You know, uh, cognizant of the white gaze when you're talking. How freely can you say things? So I think that they had a self-protective mechanism going on, and also, uh, I am not 100% sure that everyone was convinced, you know, even in the back of their minds, that it wasn't somehow something that they did. And you know, this is something that sometimes happens with victims of horrible trauma. What could I have done? What, you know, what other scenarios could have played out? You know, there's just things that I think people experience on a psychological level that can go a long way in explaining why this was not talked about, even even you know, in the intimacy of a family setting. And then with my, as I said, with the fractured relationship that I had with my father as a younger person, just we just weren't around a lot. You know, we just didn't have that opportunity.
Okay. Um, Thank you for sharing that with us. I just wanted the people to kind of know how this all kind of originated. Um, and during the Tulsa massacre, one of the things I noticed that was a major problem was when the riot began, the it seemed like everybody was on board, you know. I mean, this was not something that just occurred. Like, okay, we just gonna, you know, blow up the town. You know, I mean, it was so systematically orchestrated. The way that you know, the city officials was helping out. I mean, they had trucks, they had ambulances ready on hand. How quickly they gathered almost over 1,000 white men with guns and the ammunition that they had, the gasoline. It was like it was already set that this was going to happen. I mean, because I don't think there is a way that you can just gather all these people up in just a matter of a few minutes, you know, or a couple hours. I mean, they had literally airplanes, people. Airplanes.
Oh, okay. If I can jump in here, it actually was more like 10,000. It was 10 up to 10,000 people who converged on this district. No, it was not coincidental. It was not spontaneous. It was okay. It was a military style campaign. They were deployed just like they were fighting in Europe, just like they had fought in Europe and come back from World War One. So there were a lot of dynamics going on there with Black veterans and white veterans. A lot of the white veterans had come home and were jobless. And a lot of the Black men, what they took from their war experience, being abroad in France and England, was, we like this freedom here. And while they were abroad, they were being actually at first treated very well by the British and the French, who were grateful that they were there. But then the white Americans were incensed that Black Americans were being treated with this much regard and insisted that the same segregation that was going on in this country be instituted there, or else there were threats that American support for the war effort would be halted. And so when we think about what we know Dr. Du Bois said, you know, the problem is the color line. It really, really is. It's not an overstatement. It's not hyperbole. It is so entrenched in the psychology of these people that they will go around the world carrying their anti-Black hatred and using their power, their military power at that time, as a lever to force other people to participate in their racism. Okay, so with that backdrop in mind, we're back in Tulsa. The war has ended a couple of years ago, but people have had that military training. And there's just lots to talk about, but I'm not gonna digress here. But that's one of the reasons why those men from Greenwood felt confident taking their rifles and going down to the courthouse to defend that young man's life. They were trained also. And that's why they were able to hold off the invaders for so long, because of their own training. But they were outnumbered and outgunned. There was just no way. And so, with military precision and a military ethos, those people surrounded the Greenwood district, and they were in the mindset and in the formations of a military unit. And there would be no escape. As you said, planes were deployed, the armory was broken into, even private pawn shops and things. People, white people, white Tulsans, made sure that they were armed to the teeth. In addition, up to 500 citizens without any kind of background check or any of that were deputized to basically go out and kill whoever with impunity. And so the deputization process was a license to kill, and it was an implicit instruction to go and get a few notches on your gun butt. And so yes, this was a military style campaign, which was corroborated by the recent report that came out in January of this year by the United States Department of Justice, the first formalized investigation, full-scale evaluation and review that was taken, that took place at the federal level, and luckily it was released, the report itself, before the transition to this new and anti-Black administration.
Also, when they were out there destroying the Greenwood district, they had the protection of the city officials. They let them do it. Like, hey, go out there and kill and do whatever you want. It wasn't even like there was no repercussions. They were behind it all. They gave them the green light. So I also want to talk about, in the book, it stated that every one of the groups that they met was wearing a tag with police protection, a tag that had police protection. So when they took the Black people out of their homes with the gunshots and the fire, and you had to flee for your life, basically. I mean, you didn't have time to think, time to do anything, just get your kids, get the whatever, and just go figure it out later. Okay, it was one of those things in the middle of the night. Hey, they coming, they firing, they blowing up the place. You have got to save your life. Okay, so they said the Black men were walking with their hands up. They took them to the convention hall, I believe it was, and the tag that the people had on them was their police protection, because the town was under martial law, and all of the groups had to wear these badges in order to be permitted to come out on the streets, and everyone had to be indoors before 7 p.m., and that anyone without a tag would be arrested. So did you want to talk more a bit about that?
Well, when we think about, the fact that we've always lived in a two-faced society, in the sense that, these are the actions of an authoritarian society, a fascistic society, where individual ethnic groups are singled out. And when we think about the Jews of Germany during World War II, when they were being vilified and scapegoated and murdered, they had to walk around with a yellow star on. This was our yellow star. The police pass was our yellow star. So just remember these through lines. These are this is these things echo, and the behaviors are hallmarks of these kinds of authoritarian systems. Other people were more free, obviously not us, but we were living within a, democracy. We were living not in a democracy, but in an authoritarian society, where, boys as young as 10 were deputized to have dominion over Black men, Black people. And so that that motif is very important. That business of having to have identification on yourself, just like the slave passes when people had to travel from plantation to plantation, for example. And again, the yellow stars. And for my great grandmother, it was a difficulty for her because she had never worked for any white person in Tulsa. And in order to get your pass, you needed to have some white person come and vouch for basically your personhood and your worthiness, your value to be able to be out onto the street. If you didn't have a pass, not only might you be apprehended, you were probably put to work to, basically do whatever the white authorities said needed to be done, the digging of ditches or whatever the case might be. But people's labor was also co-opted if they were not able to produce this identification. And so, it is an insidious marker of authoritarianism. It's something that it's a clear indication that you are not living in a free society.
The DOJ report article that was released on February the 10th of January 10th of 2025, stated that the report includes reference to Walter White, a Black civil rights advocate who could pass for white. He wrote that he only had to provide his name, age, and address to be appointed as a special duty. Following his appointment, White reported that he was told he could now go out and shoot any N-word you see, and the law will be behind you.
Walter White is a very interesting figure because, of course, we know why some of us look the way we do. And there were times when he was deep undercover where his life was definitely in danger if anyone had had the slightest inkling that he wasn't who or what he represented himself as. And so, people who have who could easily meld into the broader society, but choose instead to be champions for our own people. He was certainly a hero in that regard. But yes, absolutely, these people could do whatever they wanted with impunity.
Yeah, and like you stated before, they had to obey even the little white boys, 10 years old, teenagers. They was telling the older Black men what to do, and you had to abide by it. So think of the humiliation that they experienced, and like I say, this was a thriving community. I mean, they had all kind of businesses going. I mean, they were keeping the dollar within the community. I mean, it was really thriving. That's why people went to Oklahoma and Tulsa specifically, because they heard about this Black Wall Street community. Okay. And for it to just be demolished in just 24 hours, all the hard work that people put into their businesses. This was their livelihood. This is where they lived. This is all they knew. It took years and for it to just be gone in just like literally in a blink of an eye. One lady said she went out of town, okay, a couple days before and came back. That has to be mind-boggling. So just imagine, all that you work for just gone, you know, just gone, and you have to rebuild. And then they were told that they couldn't even rebuild. They didn't even get assistance to help rebuild what was lost. It was as if, yeah, we messed up. I don't want to say, I'm about to say something else, but yeah, we destroyed your property. We destroyed your whole community, and so what? What you gonna do about it? I mean, there was no repercussions, there was no prosecution, there was nothing after all this occurred, literally. But we also know that it's because it was the Black community. It was a lot of economic jealousy going on. Hey, because remember, there was a quote unquote white Tulsa and a Black Tulsa, okay? So they saw how they were prospering and just doing the damn thing. I mean, they was on their money, getting what they need to do. They was leaving legacies behind. I mean, thriving, and didn't need help from them, because back in them days, remember, you couldn't even go to the bathroom in a white person's restaurant. So they said to themselves, hey, we're gonna get our own and keep it within our own. But it's almost as if, like, you do so much and you get so far in life, and it's almost like you can't have nothing, because within a few minutes or overnight, you're back to where you started. But I do know that it's also a leverage that they try to keep on you, stating, hey, don't forget who really in control.
Absolutely. And with the notion of the dollars that were circulating in the community, let us also remember Tulsa, Greenwood had many, many businesses, but they did not have their own bank. And so when those homes were looted and burned, their monies were stolen or got burned up. In the book, you'll see that there's one person who talks about losing $7,000 in cash, probably in their mattress or shoebox, safe, who knows. But what does $7,000, how much labor and toil does that represent in 1921 for a Black person? But beyond the money, the thing that was special about Tulsa was the interconnectedness of their community. Let me read a passage to you. This is my great-grandmother writing. After visiting Tulsa in 1918, I returned to Rochester and remained there only 5 months before being called to McAllister, to the bedside of my dear mother, who departed this life after 6 months of patience and care by the children who loved her so dearly. I then decided to locate in Tulsa. I had heard of this town since girlhood and of the many opportunities here to make money. But I came not to Tulsa as many came, lured by the dream of making money and bettering myself in the financial world, but because of the wonderful cooperation I observed among our people, and especially the harmony of spirit and action that existed between the businessmen and women. And so it was a true community in the sense that neighbors had each other's back. If you needed anything, you could rely on somebody. You weren't in the world by yourself. And then she says, the harmony of spirit that and action that existed between the businessmen and women. Women were extremely important in that community, as they always are in our communities. But we have to recall, although there were professionals in Greenwood, many of the people were domestic workers, service workers, and they worked in White Tulsa in hotels and private residences. And it was women who brought those wages back into the community that circulated around and kept the economy afloat. And in the aftermath of this horrible catastrophe, these people had to get up from the ruins of wherever they were staying, maybe in the convention center or in a field or in a Red Cross tent, and they had to go to work no matter what had happened. And you know how we have to go and wear our mask when we deal with these people, and we deal with our pain, and we have to keep that stiff upper lip. So imagine the days after June 2nd, June 3rd, June 4th, what that was like. Returning into the belly of the beast, if you will, knowing that you see people, you're looking at them every day and having to maintain your mask of civility, knowing what they've done to you and yours.
Yes, yes, yes. My question to you is, do you think if the Blacks had cooperated with the police officers of Tulsa, or had their cooperation, I should say, with the police officers of Tulsa, that they could have prevented this disaster?
No, because if it hadn't been this, it would have been something else. They wanted that land. This was the issue here. There was a justification that they were simply seeking. They wanted the land, and in the immediate aftermath, B.C. Franklin had to sue to keep them from rezoning the burned out area, so that people would not, under the rezoning, they would not have been able to rebuild. But at the same time, they weren't able to get the loans and the appropriate level of capital that they needed. And so when they rebuilt, some of them were uh, well constructed structures. Some of them were really just shacks. And that became the basis in the 1960s and 70s, when urban renewal, or as James Baldwin used to say, urban removal, came through with an expressway, and the city was able to condemn those structures, some of them of which had stood since they were rebuilt in 22, 23, 24, whatever. And so that pivotal event that happened back then, it was an inflection point, as happens in society. And once that happened, it set the stage decades later for a weakened community to be dissolved. And so that's, they came back strong, but nevertheless, the foundation had been permanently compromised. And, one of the central figures in the book is Lula Williams, who owned the Dreamland Theater. She never recovered emotionally and psychologically. And 6 or 7 years, this is a woman in her 40s, she was dead. And so, the epigenetic trauma that these people carried, some of them as they spread out around the country, it gets passed down. And, any cold-hearted or uncompassionate person who says, well, that was 100 years ago or whatever, people still feel the repercussions today. And there are still people who didn't leave Tulsa. They rebuilt. The good ones are the prime example. And they still fight. They're still fighting today for some level of justice and reparation, some level of reparative justice, and nothing has really happened. Now, I will say that Viola Fletcher and Leslie Benningfield Randall, they have been, people have given private donations. There was a philanthropic couple up in New York who gave them some money, so they are quite comfortable. But again, as you've pointed out, Tanisha, the onus for this was on the city and the state and the National Guard. And these entities in the DOJ report have been not absolved, but it has been determined that appropriate laws that would be able to prosecute them were not on the books at that time. And even if they had been, the statute of limitations would have run. Now, of course, we know that the statute of limitations doesn't run on murder. However, anybody who could possibly have committed these acts at that time is long dead. And so, there remains, different avenues, probably not under this administration, but we continue to fight these issues to get some type of recompense, some type of reparation. And I don't like that term, closure. I don't think there is closure. I think people deal with these things as they do, as best they can. They cope or they ignore. I don't know. But as a community, that community was permanently traumatized, permanently changed, permanently damaged.
Yes, for years to come.
Yeah, and intentionally. So
yes. The original book was called Events of the Tulsa Disaster. And the new book is called The Nation Must Awake. So I want to figure out, how did that kind of change? Because I think we can still get the events of Tulsa disaster, right? Is that still able to be published, or is it no more?
Let me tell you, somebody, after we published this book, somebody republished Events of the Tulsa Disaster and hid their name. I don't know who it is, but people do a lot of things once they find out something's successful, and they will get onto the bandwagon and try to take advantage of it. So that when you go on Amazon, for example, I mean, I'm not shopping on Amazon right now, but in any event, if somebody goes on Amazon looking for a book and under Mary Jones Parrish, that book is not affiliated with me, or I don't know who put that book out, but anything that, of course, is in the public domain, they can do that and kind of piggyback on the success of this book, which did perform very well. But it is not a different book, not a different text, and I don't know who put it out, but they are, as has been a complaint within the Greenwood community itself, there are a lot of people who have profiteered, and they have shared nothing with the community. They haven't gotten the okay of anybody whose likeness they have used. And that is one of the criticisms of, I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword of the, the Watchmen series and all, because while it did serve to bring more public attention to this particular and very pivotal historical event, some of the families felt disrespected.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that information with us. In my search of looking for a book regarding Tulsa Massacre, because as we talked before, I stated that I've been looking for a book built from the fire. What is that? Which one? What is that?
This book is a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
It is about the Tulsa, not just the Tulsa Race Massacre, but the whole history of Greenwood up until the present day, from the time that it was founded. It relies very heavily on Mary Jones Parrish's work, but the young man, Victor Lukerson, who did the most immaculate, meticulous research to put this book together. If anyone were to ever ask me what book they should read next about this, with more deep analysis and looking at it from several different lenses, not just through the lens of Mary Parrish, this book is, it's excellent. It's exquisite. The writing is poetic. The young man his vision is clear, and his heart is pure. He moved to Tulsa with the purpose of writing this book. I think he lived there for 5 years. And it's I can't begin to tell you what a wonderful work this is. And the way that
Can you tell us the name? Can you tell us the name of the book again?
Yes.
And the author?
It's called Built from the Fire, the epic story of Tulsa's Greenwood District, America's Black Wall Street. 100 years in the neighborhood that refused to be erased. The young man's name is Victor Luckerson, Luckerson. And it is a tough read. It took me a long time to get through it because it is so heart-wrenching. And so it just takes you and transports you into that time and the hopefulness of our people as they arrive in this place that many of them from the deep South, like my great grandmother came originally from Mississippi. She was living in Rochester, but a lot of those people came from places deep in Mississippi. And you know what life was like there for our people. And they came there with hearts full of hope. And we see what folks were willing to do to them. But it as I said, it's painful and difficult to read it, but it is the most profound work that I think I've read about Tulsa.
Well, thank you for sharing that book with us. But like I was stating, I was looking for a book on Tulsa Massacre because I've been doing a lot of researching and thinking and watching movies about Tulsa. And once I found out about it, I was like, I need to get a book. I need to find me a book. And I wanted a book with a woman's author, and it came across you some kind of way on social media. And one thing that really stands out about your book or your great grandmother's book is she has real testimonials of the Tulsa riot from the people that were in it. Like literally, she started to write, uh, you know, write the book while she was going through this. She got a job in the midst of a tragedy. Okay, that's another turnaround and extraordinary thing that did happen. She had a job. Reverend H.T.S. Johnson of the Interracial Commission asked Mary Parrish to do some reporting for that organization, and it helped get her mind off the troubles for the people. So in that process, she started writing and talking to people and trying to get their perspective of, what happened when you was, what happened, how did you view everything? And just getting interviews, okay, one-on-ones with the people at that particular time. And to hear their words and, I don't think there's another book out there that is that explicit. Like, I mean, everyone is telling you, what happened and we all kind of, can figure that. But these are real testimonies from the people, their words of how they felt and what they were going through at that particular time. That's what makes this book so profound.
Thank you for that. I would have to agree. I think also the fact that she offers data points at the end, not a complete record of losses, but she actually tabulates the amounts that individuals and families, their life savings, their life work, and what those amounts represent in today's dollars and what it means, again, within the historical context. Within the original book that my father gave me, there are also some things that were left out of this book, which are ads from local businesses that helped to finance the publication. As you can imagine, money was tight. It wasn't really an easy thing to do. And there was no expectation that it was going to be there were going to be some level of sales that were going to, kind of make up for the monies spent. And so they sold ads. And it's fascinating to look at that from the time And the model that they use, just like maybe a church program or something, where local businesses took out ads to finance the program, and in this case, they clearly sold some ads to enable and facilitate the publication of the book. We think it was printed somewhere in Denver, but we're not really sure. Haven't been able to confirm that. But Mary Parrish, did eventually leave Tulsa and went to Muskogee, where she taught in a high school for about 10 years before she ended up teaching at Langston University, which has its own very unique history. Um, the only HBCU in Oklahoma, and it is named for the uncle of Langston Hughes, who was an attorney. Um, yeah.
That was going to be that was my next question. I wanted to know, did she actually ever leave Tulsa? Because she stated she had met her brother. She had found her brother, Reuben, and he urged her to leave immediately. So I was like, I wonder, did she ever leave? Like, I know she wanted to, she said she wanted to see the affair through. So she didn't leave. And some other people asked to leave too. But that was one of the questions I wanted to ask. Did she ever leave? So thank you for answering that for me. I wanted to know, do you think that you inherit your writing skills from your great-grandmother, Mary Parrish?
Possibly my observational skills, always watching, parsing, thinking. But I think my influence really is more from a grandmother on my mother's side, who went to California from Texas and also had a remarkable life. And so, I guess we're just a bunch of sensitive and deeply feeling people who are concerned about our communities. And I think that certainly that's something that came down from both sides of my family, being deeply concerned and committed to our people and our place in this country.
Stephanie, did you have a question? Anything you wanted to talk about before I keep going? Did you have anything that you wanted to add? I know you talked in the beginning, but did you have anything to share?
Yeah, well, I guess it's more of a just thinking about what was and what is now, and the through lines, and I think they're so strikingly obvious. Yeah, what they say, eyes to see, ears to hear, which how that goes. I guess I'm wondering your thoughts on the implications for what we are experiencing now, and in a lot of ways the repetition of this same energy manifesting in the things that we're seeing right now, and what that means for us as a
Yes,
people.
yes. Oklahoma is kind of like ground zero for a lot of these educational uh, 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 um, this educational repression that we're seeing, where they have, all these House bills in the Oklahoma Senate, Oklahoma state legislature, where they are prohibiting um, the teaching of basically Black history because of the sensitivity of some of the people whose feelings might be hurt, that they have to understand what their ancestors did to other people, and that is something that will intrinsically make white children feel bad, and there should be no, in other words, they've turned all of the language of civil rights on its head, and using, in a convoluted way, the arguments that we used to gain civil rights for ourselves and for the rest of the country, basically, for others. They've turned that language very cynically on its head. And when we were saying, we don't want to be judged by the color of our skin, they're saying, oh, some of these things are, with a broad brushstroke, uh, painting a negative impression of white people. I think that we are going to have to be creative in how we respond to these things. I think that now is a time for organizing, because we are not only under attack you know, physically, morally, spiritually, emotionally, but legally in the legal system. And so, you know, these people, again, as I call them, the Confederates and the neo-Nazis are their fascists and theocrats even, because they are, you know, this Christian nationalism is a tool that co-ops people's natural religious sentiments and you know, harnesses those sentiments into something that becomes a cudgel to beat other people over the head with. And so, you know, it is a confluence of many social levers, and I think that now is the time for organizing, advocating, regrouping, retrenching, because we are under attack, and I think that you know, we can think about it kind of like symbolically, and even though it's in the practical world as well. But the the imagery of the Tulsa massacre is the embodiment of what we are still dealing with over 100 years later. It's just a little bit more sophisticated, but it is the same. The same. The goal is our destruction as a goal remains the same.
Thank you so much for that. I just feel like that's been deeply in my spirit, and to hear it reflected back. Um, I think personally, I just needed that, just in terms of my own divine assignment and what I'm supposed to be doing over here. So thank you. Um, and I think I'm wondering too, if what is the best way to connect my friend with you that is working on the movie, with Viola Fletcher's story? Is it email? Is it phone number?
Email is
Um,
fine. Email
email. So
and
then I
to
can get that from you, Tanisha, then, and I'll
absolutely,
do that by the time we get
absolutely.
off.
Yeah,
Thank you
that's
so much.
fine. And you know, one thing I would ask is what I'm trying to do right now specifically, you know, the other, you know, kind of moving parts, yes. But what I want to do is, because, you know, they are trying to erase us, not just, you know, from day-to-day life. They're trying to erase our history, not only from the schools in terms of how they can then groom children to be you know, clones of this false narrative of patriotism, by, you know, not giving them true, authentic, and complete history, and unadulterated history. But also, you know, they've taken over the archives and all these other kinds of things. Let's not underestimate how sinister these people are. And so it's not just a matter of like the intellectual repression of these stories. You know, they that I'm glad that DOJ report came out before this administration got turned over, because I bet you go on that website now, you probably won't be able to find that report. So, you know, for me, what's important to me is to get physical copies of this book. I'm sending it to some people I know overseas, even. Anything that we have, we need to preserve in paper, not just on our computer, but we need to have some things in hand. I would ask people on this call and your connections, please. This story is so important. This primary source is so important that more rather than few people have it. Please, your networks, anyone at schools, at churches, please have them, you know, participate in this one small literary way in preserving this story by you know, recommending this book when people want to know more, as Tanisha said, about the Tulsa Race Massacre, which I think, you know, we all know. There was Washington, there was East St. Louis, you know, there's Rosewood, there's Oscarville, there's Wilmington, on and on and on and on. But this is the one that is the most highly symbolic, and also the first time in American history that aerial warfare has been waged on citizens of this very country. And in my afterword, I say, growing up in Oakland, our communities are always the guinea pigs for these things that they do. Just like in Tulsa, when I was growing up, the police helicopters all night, we'd be in our homes and hear blap, 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 blap. This was in the 1960s, before other jurisdictions, as California goes, of course, so goes the rest of the nation. But, whenever we see these kinds of catastrophes, events, or whatever, we can best believe it's going to be rolled out later on more people.
Yes, yes. That's why I was stating before about that's why I want to do this. That was one of my desires, to get this information out, because so many of our own people have not ever even heard of the Tulsa massacre riot. Okay, so that's another reason why I wanted to do this segment, because it's so important. I mean, like I said, it is the right time. It's Black History Month. We're still celebrating. Timing is perfect. Book is perfect. And just about all about what's going on now, in the world. So this is so important, you know. So I'm so glad that we're getting to discuss this. So let me move on. I wanted to also talk about the fact that Oklahoma was United States territory from 1890 to 1907 before it became a state. And I don't think a lot of people knew that, because I don't think I knew that. So before it became a state, Blacks and Native Americans lived together. They did not want it to become a state because they knew the Southerners were bringing their racism directly from the South out west. So can you talk about that?
That's why people went there in the first place. As I mentioned earlier, people leaving from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia. I mean, the deep South, they wanted to get away from that oppression, which speaks to the fact that we've always desired freedom, just like any other human. We were brutalized and forced to accept enslavement by the ruthlessness of colonizers and human traffickers and death capitalists. But at the same time, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, we've never wanted it. And that's a lie that people say so that they can justify, like as with many of the other lies, to justify their own behavior and not to have to look at themselves askance. But our people left from those places as soon as they found out there was some place that they could go where they could have some modicum of freedom and self-determination. Now, they don't want us near, but they don't want us to go either. And they won't leave us alone. You know this. And so what we have is, it was a relatively free environment, but again, as soon as statehood came down, there was, there were arguments, but then they eventually, which they always do, they capitulate and compromise, and the Confederates always get their way. And so, Jim Crow set in, just like all the other states. And so, they had many bitter pills to swallow, even up until 1921, when this horrible event happened. But you cannot combat these people's mindset. We must only, we must absolutely focus on fortifying ourselves, decentering them, and going from there. But this is a situation that is what it is, and now we are in a period of resegregation and state-sanctioned discrimination. And so what I think we learn here is that these things come in waves, and that we can never afford to be complacent.
And I wanted to add that there were repercussions when we became, when Oklahoma became a state, because that's when the lynchings first reported, the first reported lynchings in Oklahoma happened on Christmas Eve in 1907, right after statehood. And from there on, it just continued, you know?
The
So,
Klan came into Oklahoma and ran the state for decades. The Klan, the state legislature was the Klan. And you know, they don't know, you know, who exactly at the official level within the city and this and that gave out certain orders, but this was the Klan. I mean, you know, in their business suits instead of their robes. But Oklahoma was a Klan state, and to many, for many intents and purposes, still is. I mean, I can't point to specifics, and so I can't, you know, make accusations about people, but you know, the spirit and the sentiment remains. And there is also a, you know, you mentioned the, I hate this word, this term, the five civilized tribes. You know, many of them uh, sided with the Confederacy during the Civil War, and also held enslaved people. Um, uh, and Black people were marched to Oklahoma along with the native people who went from North and South Carolina on the Trail of Tears. Um, Many died as well, but there was supposed to be a treaty that guaranteed Black freedmen from, you know, who had been with the five civilized tribes. You know, I think it's a Choctaw, Cherokee, Creek. I don't know. I can't name them all off the top of my head, but but the Creek freedmen, from whom I'm also descended, are in a huge battle with the Creek Nation because they too are reneging on some um, treaty rights that we are supposed to have, that we're having to go through federal court to claim. And so, you know.
yeah. And I wanted to talk about segregation. You know, we get so much pushback from segregation. Oh, you know, no one likes segregation. But let's think about it here. Let's just really, really think about segregation. Okay. Segregation enables the Black businesses and Black professionals to thrive, and they kept their dollars in their Black communities. Now, let's look at other nationalities. When they segregate, because we all know they do, okay? When they segregate, they keep their dollars in their communities and they don't buy from other communities and other nationalities. They don't. That's how they thrive, okay? But every time it seemed as though when we were segregated and we was trying to thrive, we got pushed down and, you know, oh, we don't want them to come up, you know, but everybody else is coming up. And that's why they're coming up, because
Well,
they're
you know,
so segregated and they're
we're, we're,
loyal.
we're the group who cannot, we're always identifiable. You know, we can't, you know, many other groups, uh, they become white, basically. You know, when they first come here through Ellis Island, a lot of them weren't considered white, but they became white. We can't, nor should we want to become white. It's because we're, you know, automatically identifiable. And the other point is, no other race of people was enslaved on this land, and that psychological need to say there's an external reason why we treated those people like they did, not because we have a soul sickness. We will never get out from underneath that. And as long as the problem is, and I don't mind living away from whoever, but the problem is, of course, that as long as we are identifiable, which we always will be, they're not going to leave us alone. We can segregate, which was the case in Tulsa, but it didn't help. It did not preserve us. But I think we do have to have more of a cooperative spirit with one another, and to build those relationships and that sense of community. But I just think that it may be, even if it is an aspiration, I just think it's just impractical on a day-to-day basis. Not because we can't run our own stuff, but we are inside a system. But I do think that we need to exercise our economic power much more so than we do. And me personally, I'm not buying nothing.
Period. Okay. Yes. So I wanted to move a little further and just to talk about one more thing. Tulsa 2020, the mass grave excavation. They dumped their bodies in mass graves. The people that died in the Tulsa massacre, they dumped their bodies in mass graves in Oakland Cemetery. They never even had a proper burial. So remember, they did dig up some bodies. I believe in 2020 they were doing different. They did a couple of excavations at the cemetery and found remains of people from 1921, 20 years later. In 2020, and I'm so glad that they did. Hear them out because when the ladies, the descendants, try to get reparations and go to court for this act. What was the name? It was Randall and the other lady.
Benningfield, Randall, Fletcher.
Yes, Fletcher and Randall. Yeah, they were the part of why they were surprised by the decision because the case was dismissed. They put it into the courts, the United States courts, and the judge dismissed the case. And part of why they were surprised by the decision was because the attorney said the same judge who dismissed the case had ruled last year at the time that the lawsuit could move forward. So it's like they didn't get anything when they took it to court. So it's like the only thing that they did get, I mean, some type of awareness was the excavation.
What I'll say is it's not finished, but it's finished for right now. And, 4 years, these people are 110 years old. It's, I think that they're playing a waiting game. But the descendants and the younger people who have picked up this mantle, they're not putting it down. It will continue to move forward in whatever iteration that I can't speak to. I'm not an attorney. But what I will say is a friend of mine is a genealogist, and she was working on the team, the Mass Graves Project. This is a very serious and solemn conversation. One of the named parties on the DOJ report was a young man, 25 years old, by the name of C.L. Daniel. C.L. Daniel was a World War I veteran. And he had been in Utah. And his mother was in Georgia. And she wanted him to come home because she said she was doing poorly. She needed help. I think her husband was either dead or not around or something. And she needed his support. So he had embarked on a journey from Utah down to Georgia, got off the train in Tulsa, and got caught up and was killed in the massacre. He was identified through DNA analysis of people. He didn't have his own children, but people who were, I think, descended from his brother. And this young man had been hastily stuffed into a coffin that was too small for him, which means to say it wasn't custom made. It seems as though they had coffins ready. Now, what does that tell you? And he was all akimbo inside. His remains were scrunched into, a final resting place that was too small for his large frame. his mother had written to, I think, the Department of the Navy or something, and said that she thought her son had been caught up in the massacre, was in Tulsa or something like that, because he never showed up. And they were able to use that letter through research to identify possible relatives. Then they did the DNA match, and sure enough, they came up with a name. Fascinating process. Now, this was announced, I think, last year. Along with Dr. A.C. Jackson, and you know what happened to him. They were named parties on the DOJ Civil Rights Division evaluation and review that was issued this January of this year. But this young man's remains have been, they were not reburied. They were sent to his family, and I think that they've had a proper burial. But that brings up another issue, which is that the city is still funding it, but we don't know what that's going to, if that might peter out at any time. They have a couple of other bodies that they are working on that do have gunshot wounds. And the gunshot wounds are from different calibers of gun, which means that they just were opening fire on people, So it wasn't just like, oh, this one person is here and they shoot that other person. It was a melee. People just getting blasted. And so I think they're working on the identification of those few. They may have some others, but what's happening now is there's some conversation now that interest is dying down, or more broad scale interest. And then you can do your dirt when nobody's watching. They're just thinking about reinterring, the bodies where they are. Still in mass graves, still unidentified, and the world goes
on. Yes. Well, that will end our discussion for today. I think we've pretty much covered everything that we can within this small time frame. I mean, we can also go on and on and on about this because it is our history. But again, please, everyone, if you can, please go get this book. The name of it is called The Nation Must Awake. My Witness to the Tulsa Massacre, to the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921 by Mary E. Jones Parrish. Please go and get this book and hand it out to as many people that you can. Buy from a friend, family, whoever. We thank you again, Annalise, for coming on, taking time out to discuss this. Do you want to leave where people can reach you, follow you on social media?
Yeah, it's my name has a difficult spelling, but please ask Tanisha. Tanisha, you can feel free. It's annalisa.bruner@gmail.com, and anyone can feel free to reach out to me via email. I will respond. But I do thank you for this opportunity. Thank you so much for listening so attentively. It is my mission, as I said, to resurrect my great-grandmother's reputation and to let people know how important this woman has been to the preservation and the promulgation of this important history. I can't say enough about her, and I'm still discovering things about her life even today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Have a good week. See you guys later. And
thank
once
you.
Again, happy Black History Month, everybody.
Happy Black History
Month, everybody.
Bye.
I'll be reaching out today.
Okay. All right. Talk to you guys later. Have a good one.
Take care. Be blessed.
Bye-bye.